Here we go. Roll video.
I think anybody creating something new must have an adventure.
It's not cinema, it's something else.
My advice to a young filmmaker is to make a movie every week.
The whole bag of movies can be learned in about a day and a half.
But suspense is essentially an emotional process.
You gotta make films. You gotta make it and get it seen.
Cinema for me is a world of when I dream.
Hey everybody, welcome to Behind the Slate. I'm your host, Aaron Strand, and today is a very special episode of the show made in collaboration with ATL Film Party. ATL Film Party is an Atlanta-based community event serving local filmmakers. My good friend B. Sonnenreich established the event in 2021 because so many local filmmakers put their blood, sweat, and tears into Georgia's $4.4 billion film industry and yet can barely pay for their own incredible projects, let alone get them seen at sold-out events. Now, if you're an Atlanta-raised or Atlanta-based filmmaker, you are eligible to submit to ATL Film Party's open call for shorts. The next call is for short documentaries, and the winner receives a $500 grant and mentorship from ATL Film Party sponsor, the Southern Documentary Fund. The deadline for short docs is May 1st, 2023 at 11:59 p.m., and you can submit at filmfreeway.com/ATL Film Party. So, joining me today is a filmmaker, photographer, experimental ethnographer, world traveler, and the winner of ATL Film Party Cycle 4 with his fantastic music video / documentary / portrait of Mechanicsville called The Heart of the City. It is my pleasure to welcome Artemus Jenkins. How you doing today?
I'm good, Aaron. How you doing?
I'm doing good, man. I'm doing good. Heart of the City is really fantastic, like a really special piece of work. I'm trying to think of like how I can describe this music video for people who haven't seen it. I mean, they should definitely go out and watch it. So
Absolutely.
Because it's not like a normal music video. So it's about 20 minutes long, maybe a little give or take. It follows an artist, Chili Chills, as he's walking through the Mechanicsville neighborhood of Atlanta. Maybe can you tell us a little bit about Mechanicsville to kind of set the scene?
For sure. So the first, thing that makes this music video different, than what at least is going on now is the fact that I wanted to blend it, with documentary. Hip hop, just as a culture, the music, was very, ethnographic. It basically was people talking about their experiences. And then, when you get a budget to be able to make the film portion of it, then it's pretty much an introduction to somebody else's culture to align with the story. So Mechanicsville is a historical neighborhood in Atlanta. It is known primarily for, being a place where the railroad workers stayed and just those artisans of Atlanta from a while ago. I think Mechanicsville was established in the 1800s. It's one of the oldest neighborhoods. So being able to look at it from a contemporary standpoint and, kind of report on, what is it known for now? Who are the people that are staying there? How has the spirit of the neighborhood continued to be embodied in our present day? That was, the kind of modality for exploring.
How would you describe that ethnographic portrait of Mechanicsville today?
What we were speaking about in the film was that there is a history of community, the historical spirit of the neighborhood, very blue collar, very, everybody supporting each other. That spirit is still there, but just in terms of what people have come to be known for, it's not necessarily about, building railroads or, things like that. But it is about people building, a way for themselves and taking what they have and, just being able to want better and create better. So the pieces, the bones, the spirit is still there, but, just what the neighborhood looks like. I look at it as a bit of a time capsule, so when we are looking at a full picture of the neighborhood historically, you have a reference point outside of the fact, we're not just talking about railroad workers anymore.
It's also incredibly striking because you juxtapose this really hard-hitting trap music with this incredibly striking high contrast black and white photography. Your eye as a portrait artist really comes into like capturing the portraits of, you know, whether it's guys on the basketball court, kids riding their bikes along the street. And it's just this incredible juxtaposition that tells this really powerful story, but completely buried into the subtext. What were some of the steps that led you to those artistic choices?
From an image standpoint, at that time, I was really practicing street photography pretty heavily. I had taken on a street photography practice like as a way of just helping my cinematography, like just being able to be more practiced and finding images, you know, like wherever they are. Because like from a documentary standpoint, I didn't just want it to be about solely just capturing like direct, absolute truth, you know, because that's just not really what the film ends up being anyway. You know, like as soon as you edit or as soon as you like point the camera a certain way or miss something, you know, that is also happening. So the black and white, you know, why it was a stylistic choice for me, it's partially because a lot of people knew my photography for being black and white, and I wanted to begin to like, you know, take street photography from the practice space, but more so like a fully aligned, you know, expression of just what I'm seeing through no matter what the medium is. So the motion pictures being able to look like the photography and vice versa. And like the challenge of the photography is being able to like say a lot with like one image. Whereas with motion pictures, a lot of images are making up, you know, like whatever you're trying to communicate, and you have sound and you have like, you know, all of these other devices. So the photographic aspect of it was just really big because I just wanted to give people something, you know, to focus on in a way that was easy to receive, you know, like while the music was kind of like contrasting, you know, the harsh reality of it. Like even, you know, Chili himself, you know, he was a poet before he, you know, started branding himself and moving as a rapper. So like the things that he's saying are even like kind of shrouded in a bit of subtext unless you really like know what's going on. So it just all kind of like ended up complementing each other, like the poetry of the words, the poetry of the images, and, you know, really being able to tell like a harsh story, you know, in a beautiful and emotive way is what the thought process was.
Well, definitely it comes across really, really well. It's a really, really striking piece of work.
Thank you.
You grew up in Baltimore, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what are some of your earliest film memories or seeing films on the TV or going to the theater? What are the first things that made an impression on you?
So a funny story that, you know, my gotta have at least one naughty word in it. This is like 92, so I was in 5th grade, and that's how old I am. And
everyone's doing the math right now.
Right. It was like, yeah, 91, 92. So Boys in the Hood had came out. That was a really impactful movie for me just because to go back to the point of like the place that hip hop videos served in my life, those are also like, you know, a lot of early, basically like short films that you're being exposed to. Mm-hmm. And these short films are like showing you something, you know, that you can't readily see in the same way you could now. Like now you could go on YouTube and probably type in America's Most Dangerous Hoods and like, you know, see somebody's perspective on like walking through the streets of Baltimore. And like at that time, you know, it would have been like cops, you know, depending on like whatever city they were in. So, you know, music videos in our films early on in the 90s were a less skewed view of like what was going on. They were designed to represent authenticity. So Boys in the Hood was just like a pivotal film because, you know, the PR was really good for John Singleton. Like, you know, we all knew that he was like really young and he was just getting out of USC and this was his first film and it was like, you know, a landmark, you know, whatever. And it was also right in line with kind of like the zenith of gangster rap or what is called gangster rap. They had like, you know, the music NWA and then they had like the biggest, you know, I guess persona out of the NWA acting in the film, you know, with Ice Cube. So everything, you know, that I'm seeing in the movie is like, you know, I'm not buying my own music, but I do get to go to the movies, you know, with my mother and, you know, my aunt. So we saw Boys in the Hood in the theaters. And like, you know, I'm just getting all of this lingo and, you know, these aesthetics and all of that. So that was the first time outside of just listening to the music of the West Coast, you know, where I was just like actively hearing like, you know, women being called bitches and hoes, which was a direct contrast to the type of music that we were hearing and the images that we were seeing like on the East Coast. Like East Coast rap at the time was very uplifting, you know, no cursing, no smoking weed.
Like kind of consciousness sort of.
Yeah. You know, even Queen Latifah like was a major figure, like just as a contrast to how people see a lot of mainstream women artists now. Like she was saying, you know, nah, you can't call me a bitch, or you can't do this, or address me as this way. So this movie, you know, where you know, in every scene almost, you know, somebody being called out their name, it's just like, all right, I guess this, you know, just how people talk. So there was this like new girl in my class, and like, you know, I got caught up in the groupthink of, you know, giving new people a hard time or whatever, like unnecessarily. So you know, it's a big deal when people see you outside of school. Like you don't never know quite how to react. So like I didn't know that she lived around my way. So like me and my mother was walking somewhere, and she crossed by, and then like she just spoke like a nice person. She just, you know, said, hey. And then I said, you know, don't talk to me, ho. And like directly just important, you know, like from Boys in the Hood with the lingo. And my mother like immediately like corrected that. Like, oh no, nah, that is not like what you call women. Cause I mean, you know, I ain't know. It's just a word that's just being thrown around. I had never heard it.
You're a kid. You're in 5th grade.
Yeah, like bitch. Yeah, but like, you know, I felt like hoe was fair game, but it wasn't.
I mean, Ice Cube makes a vociferous defense of the word in the film. So
yeah, man, you know, like it don't mean nothing. It's just, you know, even like when I got down to Atlanta, a friend of mine, like he would call everybody bitch. That was his excuse. So like even when he would call like a woman a bitch, she would get offended. He was like, it ain't got nothing to do with you. I call everybody bitch, but you know, people don't be trying to hear that.
What was there anything else from Boys in the Hood that like you remember, like visually, or any other parts of the storytelling that like kind of like hooked you?
It's just always been a film that I've referred back to because as I've like grown as a filmmaker, you just having like such a strong reference point. Like at that time, we definitely knew about Spike Lee, and then here comes like John Singleton like as another one. You know, you can always try to just keep us with like one, but like. You know, it's at least from the other side of the country. I guess that's how they were able to coexist. You know, like we got Spike Lee from New York, we got John Singleton. But when I decided that I was going to become a filmmaker, I was able to go to American Black Film Festival, one of the earlier ones. And this was like 2007, I guess. And my family, my uncle, they sponsored my trip down there, so I was able to like get into the workshops. You know, like, you know, the film festivals, you can just get a ticket to get in and watch films, or some films, or maybe just go to events, or you can also pay the money to do the workshop component. So since I was learning, there was a screenwriting workshop, a film making, I guess like cinematography and editing, and producing. Robert Towson was the instructor for the producing workshop, John Singleton for the cinematography.
That's incredible though.
At that point, having already seen the movie and then like having the opportunity to like sit in and hear him talk about it, he was bringing up these things, of course, that I had seen, you know, like, but didn't hit the same way, you know, based off of like, you know, my understanding as a child. Like as a child, primarily identifying just with the emotion of the film, like the shit was sad, like, you know, like, yeah, as a starting point.
For sure.
But I did relate heavily like to Trey's character, like, you know, just seeing like his story arc. You know, his parents wanted better for him despite, you know, the fact that he was within this environment. And like the idea of there being multiple personalities that exist within these environments. Like we're not all just one thing just because of like the space that we're in, and our path, you know, like can be determined, you know, by us. Like, you know, the saddest scene, you know, like it was like my first time crying in a movie and like feeling like, you know, I could be okay with this. Like I feel like everybody crying, you know, about Ricky getting shot.
Oh my gosh.
But like it was literally like a choice in like, you know, path, you know, the way that, you know, Doughboy was going, the way that Ricky chose to walk, the way that Trey went. and just even all the events that led up to that, like a series of decisions, like you able to see that at like 10 years old, that, the decisions we make count in a different type of way, growing up. So at 20 something, hearing John Singleton give context on like these scenes, like he talked about the drive-by scene when Ricky got shot, and like he called attention to like the saxophone and, just like the cinematic, kind of like language being activated in that way, like how the saxophone built and escalated the tension, like right up to the part where they zoom in and rack focus on the shotgun barrel. So learning like, in my 20s, early on, like these kind of like fundamentals and like ways to look at filmmaking. And this is all like from a narrative standpoint. Like I was already decided that I wanted to do documentary, but it just also made me think about how to like translate these narrative devices across like both disciplines, and like how you can, I think it was like one of those early kind of like pathways for me format, and the fact that I would want to blend the two things. Like I wouldn't want to just pick either or,
So I have to know, what was that light bulb moment where you knew you wanted to be a filmmaker? And then from what you just said, it sounds like you also already knew that you wanted to do documentary. So where were these light bulbs coming off from?
My choice to do documentary was based off of resourcefulness. When I was thinking about the reality of the choice I was making, like I had already been through college and already had these student loans and, jobs, and whatever that looked like in my mind wasn't what it looked like in reality. So it's like, well, I do like this thing. And everybody's like, well, you should go to school for it. And it was just like, y'all ain't got these student loans like how I got. Like, so go to film school now. And then, I ain't had the best grades, and like I didn't even have a liberal arts degree. So it's not like.
What did you go to school for?
Sales and marketing.
Okay.
Yeah. I've made these skills make sense, but filmmaking just was something that, that I kind of got into based off of a job that I had, doing sales and marketing related things. Thinking about all those things just in terms of the economics of the choice, it's made sense to me that just based off of practicality and execution, I would get more opportunities to make documentaries. And then I could just explore how to tell stories like within that medium. Because as I was learning about it, documentary just seemed very much to me like, filmmaking fundamentals. Like if you learn the fundamentals of basketball, what all of your moves become, and like how you get the ball in the hole still produces the same result. So with filmmaking, if it's just like, all right, we telling stories, like whether it's narrative or documentary or whatever, like we still trying to get people from A to B, and then to C and whatever with a story.
Getting real Tim Duncan about it. I like it.
Yeah, man. I mean, anybody who learn how to make documentaries, like you can make any type of film is the way I look at it.
Was there a documentary that you saw early on that like set it off, where you're like, oh, I could do this? 'Cause I didn't watch a lot of documentaries when I was younger. Maybe, I mean, even like before I was like 20, 25.
No, it wasn't really any documentaries that set off, like, all right, I'm going to do this. I think based off the fact that, like I had that job and, I was also operating under that kind of pretense, that you got to have everything figured out before you turn 30. So like when I got into filmmaking, I was like 23, 24. And it was like, okay, I finally like feel like I figured something out. So now I got to like make up for lost time. And I was thinking, yeah, how can I spend the least money while still like getting the best return on, what I'm actually doing artistically? How does it like fit into, just the practical aspects of making money? When I was thinking about it like that, just more people, I could see that more people would have a necessity for a documentary or a person who can do it, as opposed to like just being a narrative filmmaker. Like something about being a narrative filmmaker, it's just a little more insular. Like, you making up shit. So you got to have like more time and resources to like really make up shit and then do it specifically like the way you made it up. So yeah, to me, it just seemed like something that would just take longer. And I think also the stories, like reading about people's filmmaking journey, like people seem to take a long time to be able to get like to their first film. And then from there, I guess you get to do a whole bunch. But like with documentary, it was just like, I could just like make some shit and it'll just be done because I said it's done. And like, you know, it's expressing some aspect of truth. So all I knew from the documentaries that I had seen is that I wanted to make more interesting documentaries. And it wasn't a particular documentary that did that. Like I just grew up watching documentaries in school, and like the tone of them and like the idea, perception, you know, people had of them was, you know, just some really academic, boring shit.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
I was just like, it's a lot of interesting stuff going on in the world. I think if I marry the things that I see and the things that I would want to talk about, you know, with the documentary format, like it could add something, you know, mostly new.
So once you made this decision and you're 23, how did you set about this course of self-education to kind of get yourself to the level? Because, you know, that we, as artists, we all confront that problem, right? Where our vision and the excitement that we feel is not commiserate with our skill level. So how did you set about this course to get to where you wanted to be?
Barnes and Nobles was, you know, still pretty popping. So started out by like, you know, I was in New York. So I, you know, just went and like I got books. Like it was a whole bunch of physical media. It's 2007. So
which was your Barnes and Noble in New York?
The one I like going to the most was on Broadway up in Manhattan.
Oh, okay.
Like that one was usually empty enough, and like, you know, it had a different feel to it. It wasn't like a stale kind of Barnes and Nobles. They had wood and, you know, escalators and multiple levels and shit like that.
I mostly remember the one on North Union Square.
Oh yeah, I would go to that one sometime if I was down that way.
Yeah.
So I was mostly uptown, and it just depending on where I wanted to end up after I got out of there.
Yeah.
So like where I worked at was on 58th Street. And then like, you know, I'd be like, all right, I guess I'll go up to Broadway, because then after that, I could just walk, you know, back to Harlem. So matter of fact, this is throwback too. So back in my day, you know, like they had special features on DVDs. So like a lot of what I was coming to learn was from the special features. Like I always kind of wondered, like when I was younger and we would watch DVDs, I'd be like, what is this? And then you turn it on and then just be some boring ass talking. But then like as a filmmaker, you find out like, oh, they actually talking about how they made this shit.
Yeah.
So Spike Lee is always really good for special features. And like, you know, I bought, you know, like particular movies of his that like I just really like. So hearing the special features for Do the Right Thing, for She's Gotta Have It, especially She's Gotta Have It, that really informed, you know, like my process of how to like make something on your own.
Oh yeah.
Another like person that I researched a lot, at least in terms of what his, I guess, process was from independent to becoming commercial, was Robert Rodriguez. Like he, you know, had written a book based off of making his first film from like an independent into, you know, like a studio production.
Of course.
And like he put out a lot of like independent film literature. Like he built a whole persona around like, you know, being like a rebel filmmaker and all of that.
How to shoot a film for $10,000 or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So books like that. There was another book that I read. It was like, I think it was called I think like Everything They Won't Tell You in Film School or something like that, you know, and it had like 100 little small chapters. Like that was basically the A to B process of producing the movies. Like the first chapter might be like, so you want to make a movie, and then like, you know, you do that thing, and then it's like, all right, you're gonna need this, and then it's like, okay, so like a mixture of those things, and then like studying my Final Cut Pro manual, which was a pain in the ass then, but I couldn't imagine even thinking of doing some shit like that now. Like that, the actual, like I had Final Cut 6. So it was like, you know, the encyclopedia looking box, and you open it up and it's got the discs and
oh my
like
goodness,
all of that shit. And then like the whole like kind of 2 books talking about each component of it. So like the audio and you know, whatever. So I was like reading as much of it as I could stand, and like getting myself to a place where it's like, all right, I can cut stuff together, and I guess I'll just fill in the gaps, you know, along the way.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was pretty much the process. Just really taking what had happened in college and like understanding what education was. It was just like, well, if I just like read shit and do it, then that pretty much would be school.
That's right.
So I'm gonna find some things to read, and I'm gonna just do them quick, you
Yeah.
know, and I'll just get it.
I'm always amazed that like it's not like all of it is like necessarily translating, at least I found, into my work. You know, it's always like I'll read all this stuff, oh, this is so great, this is so great, this is so great. But it's like really like one or two things that are actually like making it into my toolkit. Do you remember, or do you know sort of like what are some of the things that you've read that stuck with you from those books you were reading in 2007 that kind of carry through to today?
I think what stuck with me was based off of like repeated action, you know, like whatever I think I was getting from the books, it was coming out in the things that I was actually doing the most. So then when I started tapping into that, I would just kind of like continue to create my own kind of curriculum year by year. And then I started just focusing on things that I felt were necessary, like to really like refine my own style. So like the first couple years was just kind of general, as much as I can, you know, stand information. Like, you know, all right, I definitely need to learn how to edit. I put a lot of emphasis on learning how to edit. That was, I think, if anything, what stuck out the most. Just being able to develop that rhythm and then understanding like what editing is. The biggest thing that I came to understand from it was that like it's really based off of feel. Like before any of the other stuff, knowing all the short keys and compositing and masking and all of that type of stuff, like you can get other people to do that. But everybody don't have rhythm, you know, like in terms of like being able to marry that to a story and being able to just like basically be invisible. Like that's what a good edit is. I think that's probably just what stuck with me the most. And after I like understood how I was going to arrange things, you know, just from having like a strong editorial foundation, then I would like hone in. So like a year, I might focus on rudimentary, like I might focus on cinematography. And that's when I got into street photography more. And then when I saw that really becoming like a major part of what was separating, you know, my style of filmmaking from other people's, then I remember leaning in more on like intangible things, like what is it that I'm like, you know, doing in an interview that influences what I get back and how I use it in the story. So the energy of a person, how that comes across on camera and how that lends itself to what's actually being said. And then how that creates a feel for the person watching it, where it's just like they're kind of a voyeur to this conversation and they can get the subtext of just like what was in the room based off of like something that, you know, ain't really in a book to learn, you know?
Bringing up that quality of being an interviewer is another thing that in Heart of the City, you really feel your not quite invisible hand, because like you're like, we feel you there.
Yeah.
But it's so clear that you were able to like, you know, find that trust, rapport, safety, like with your subjects to like get them to open up to share their story. Because most people, you know, running up to them, sticking a camera in their face, like they might want to present a certain way, but that's definitely not the truth that like you're trying to get to as a filmmaker.
Yeah, you try and get as close as you can to it. You know, it's still, you know, a medium, you know, that's kind of interrupting like, you know, how true anything is going to be. But yeah, the way I thought about it, it was really just about, as an interviewer, just tapping into like what are the things, you know, that like are innate to me, you know, just as a human, because that's what's anchoring all of this stuff. Like, you know, the camera is just the camera until you pick it up and start doing something with it. And when I now just reflect on, I guess, what are the skills that stand out, like it's mostly based off of things that just, I guess, are like who I am. Like I've always been observant. I've always had like some type of magnetic quality that doesn't take too much to get, you know, people to start telling me stuff. Like sometimes people just start talking. Sometimes people can't wait, you know, to say something on camera.
I can I'm in the room with Artemus right now. I can attest to his magnetism. It's happening.
Right. So like, you know, you just go with that, and it, you know, you be responsible with it. You know, like you're responsible for, you know, the things that people are saying, and how it makes them look. Because I mean, you still just have that power, you know, based off of the interview and the edit.
So at this stage of your career, your life, you know, where you're at in your work journey, who are the filmmakers that you're drawing inspiration from today?
I've always been aware of like, what are the people? I guess like the champions of documentary, like, Ken Burns, Errol Morris, Werner Herzog. I've been learning about more people like William Greaves. And this is not like necessarily I just learned about these people, but over time, when you start studying documentary, it's some people that's definitely gonna pop up, like the first three. Throw Michael Moore in there. But then depending on how deep in it you get, like you learn about somebody like Stanley Nelson, who was, essentially Ken Burns. He just makes different shit. Ken Burns studies like American history from a more Eurocentric lens. He does some Black stories, but Stanley Nelson is primarily, studying American history from an African-centered lens, and just even their approach. They're both around the same age, and they hold like the same kind of space in like something like PBS, which anybody who came to understand documentaries early on, like your view was probably informed by Ken Burns.
Yeah.
So Stanley Nelson kind of fills that space now for people who look like me and who come from the same culture, and just them, like and not just them, but everybody that I would think of, like I think of a different place that they hold in documentary filmmaking. So Errol Morris and Werner Herzog are more so in like the independent, not quite sensationalized story, but like they have different ways that they're going to look at a story and like a different way of presenting it. So I think about Werner Herzog more just because like he's doing these documentaries, but they're like these, almost like narrative, experimental kind of character studies. And like it's always some fantastical kind of like, maybe not always a place, but the place is seen like that. Like Grizzly Man, for instance, it was just in America, but like
but they're bears. Bears.
But the fact that somebody's out there with the bears, like, it makes it seem like it's a whole other like land, that like you being welcomed into, because when would you be out there with bears? But like some of his earlier movies, like he was going to like South America and like creating these big set pieces, that he had to do, and like all the stories associated with that. So it's still a wide range and set of influences. But when I think about William Greaves, who I mentioned, he was a theater actor, and he saw like the gap or the void that there was in storytelling. So he got in this documentary, like I think maybe with similar motivations, like realizing that there is a lot that you can do with the medium, based off of like the minimal amount of resources you need to tell a story. And he utilized his connections from theater, to basically have a pathway for broadcasting. He had he had a journal. Yeah, it was called the Black Journal. Let me make sure I'm saying the things right.
Yeah,
but
sure.
From what I'm pretty certain, like it was called Black Journal, and like he would just basically cover like important stories, like to our culture in America, and he produced it all independently. He was able to get like funding for it, and like it had multiple seasons, multiple hosts. So when I'm thinking now about like the things that I want to make, and going back to like Ken Burns and Stanley Nelson, like how do you plug stories into a space that can constantly like be putting that out? Like how do you create an infrastructure around like storytelling around particular topics that people are always going to be interested in?
You have a feature-length documentary called Never Die With Your Shoes On, which is like an examination about contemporary manhood and masculinity.
Yeah.
Were some of these influences towards that project?
So the project you're talking about, the title is Broken Stories. Like the caption, we just went real minimalist with the caption. So the caption is Never Die With Your Shoes On, which is a quote that was within that film. That particular film, Broken Stories, I made that in correspondence with a solo exhibition that Maya Bailey was doing in 2000, or had done in 2017. My first feature-length documentary, Color Outside the Lines, that was when Maya Bailey and I first worked together. Like we partnered up for 3 years to get that piece done, and created a very innovative, story and contribution to that aspect of art and culture. Okay, so Maya Bailey, he is a a very like, instrumental figure in arts and culture in Atlanta. He's been living in Atlanta since like the 90s, like maybe 96 or something like that. And he came in as a tattoo artist. Like that's what people knew him for initially. And he's been dedicated to expanding like, people's understanding of what artists can be and like, how we can create lives for ourselves as artists, just through the things that we can naturally do. So as a tattoo artist, like he's helped make history or create history by innovating, like the styles and like ways to apply tattoos to dark skin. West End Tattoo was the shop, that he really came and grew up in and developed as a businessman. And that's also where like they produced, like a lot of, or learned a lot of the innovative techniques that led to being able to do things like apply a wider range of colors to dark skin, format and tattoos so that they flow with the body, and high contrast, like as a way of increasing visibility, for a tattoo. And then, people like Tupac, Ludacris, Usher, when we start going past West End Tattoo and getting into the other shops that him and his partner Tukey Carter owned, they tattooed pretty much everybody in the 90s. Like they were really pivotal in allowing tattooing on black skin to be a part of like everybody's collective consciousness in a way that wasn't just like, thugged out or, low life, associated. Like they helped push it forward as an art form. Yeah. And now he owns and like, he came with the blueprints for this community center in Castleberry Hill called Peter Street Station. And on that block, they have 4 spaces that this collective of artists that I've been documenting all operate. So there's a tattoo shop called City of Ink. There's a clothing store called Closet 323. There's a loft where it's like a private tattoo studio and like recreational space. And then the community center at the end of the block. It's a multi-level art and design community incubator for artists. So that's the quick bio.
How'd you get linked up with him? And then how did that lead to this first documentary project, feature-length documentary?
So when I got back to Atlanta from New York, after I had figured out that I was going to be filmmaking, my job needed me to come back down to Atlanta. So, I was a little apprehensive about it because I really liked the flow that I was finding in New York, like the energy of New York. I knew it was going to be very different from the energy in Atlanta. So I was a little worried about, Atlanta making me a little slow. So just when I got back down here, like, I remember having sent like a whole bunch of MySpace messages to different artists. Like, I'm coming, I'm going to be moving to Atlanta. I'm doing music videos. If you need music videos, like that was my dribbling and my free throws at the time. So, and also like getting paid was the purpose of that too. So like,
there's probably, potentially thousands of people, maybe even millions of people sending those messages right now.
Right.
You were a pioneer of sliding into DMs.
I was
asking people if they needed a music video.
Right. I was going hard at it. And like 2 people responded. Fadia Cater was one of the people who responded. She was managing a group named Proton at the time, and he had this mixtape called the Red and Purple mixtape, and she was like, yeah, I need a bunch of videos, and like she was speaking my language. She wanted to like do like some conceptual and consistent and multiple storylines pulling together. We only did one for that particular group, but it was really dope. And like she premiered it at I think the 5 spot in Little 5 Points, when they used to do music, and they had like a whole mixtape release. So from there, because there weren't a lot of people doing music videos or running around with cameras at the time, like a good amount of people knew somebody named Artemus Jenkins was running around doing music videos. So I had that establishing, and then I was working with this independent production company called Vimby. They were a part of like crafting that model of like a national network of filmmakers, that you can plug stories into at any time. They wanted to explore art and culture and music and fly shit like most people. So Atlanta was just like wide open, like in terms of being able to be independent and move around and like make an impact. So that I think also helped me shape the need to carve out the documentary lane, because I had seen that like a lot of people going to be doing music videos because it's a lot of artists who are going to be rapping and doing shit. So with the Vimy thing, I was able to go hard with the documentary stuff because they were short pieces and I could get paid for each one. So like I'm basically just pitching as many people as I can find because I got access to all of this arts and culture shit through meeting Fadia. Like she would just introduce me to everybody, and anytime. Tukey Carter, Maya's partner, who I mentioned, he was also a rapper, and he was a part of this group called Hollyweird. And this appeared in Atlanta, like this was around the time like with people like Yellow Wolf, was coming to be a thing, and Grip Plies, was making a lot of noise. That kind of like, I guess that hipster period, that everybody hates being called, but that's what made it easy for people to see. That's what was going on in music. So I did a piece on Tukey's group, Hollyweird, and like it blended with the fact that they were in a tattoo shop. Like we focused on that a little bit. And then that's how I met Maya. So from there, he wanted to do, well, before I skip ahead too much, he saw the Hollyweird piece. The people liked it, and they were like, what else you got? And I was like, well, I know the co-owner of this tattoo shop. I could do a piece on him. So it was kind of like a little double dip. Like I was like, I ain't even got to go out to space. Did the piece on Maya, and Maya liked the details of the piece, like just the things that I focused on. Like he could see that I was filmmaking in a different type of way. And then he had a business proposition for me, and that business proposition was my first feature-length documentary. My first feature-length piece, where I really became a documentarian and really also started referring to myself as an artist, was Color Outside the Lines. Like up to that point, I had, done a lot of reps in the gym with music videos. And so by the time I met Maya Bailey, and like he asked me to do this documentary with him, those things helped me feel confident enough that I could like do something like this. And plus I really wanted to. Like I was, doing a lot of pitching, with music videos, constantly trying to get people to pay me to do my own ideas. And that doesn't really work out a lot. So
the cold truth of the independent filmmaker,
right?
Yeah.
You gonna have to do your own shit if that's what you want.
Yeah.
So when Maya, said that he wanted to do a documentary about this topic that had never been done or explored, and he wanted to let me do my thing and he was going to do his thing. Like that's of course what every independent filmmaker wants to hear. It's like, oh, you're going to facilitate like me being able to do the thing that I want to do, and like yeah, okay, I'm with that. Like
sounds good.
I don't have any real interest in tattoos, like at least I didn't up until this moment, but it seems interesting enough. Like what he told me that he wanted to focus on, it just fit and checked a lot of those boxes in terms of like what I wanted to express as a filmmaker. Like I wanted to do stories that allowed people to see us in a different light, that allowed us to see us at our best, that allowed people to see us in a different context of existence. Like to go back to those movies like Boys in the Hood, like it was dope. They started off a definite like era in the 90s, but by the end of the 90s, that's pretty much all we was doing. Like we were a caricature of like those types of films by the mid 90s, with films like Don't Be a Menace and like CB4. So up until like the point where I began making film, I felt like all we had really seen was like hood shit and black love shit, and then like slapstick, comedy type stuff. So to do something about an art form, that was taboo, and like a lot of the things that are seen as taboo, like about our existence, it was provocative enough and interesting enough, for me to actually like feel like I could learn while doing what I do, like as a filmmaker, and like really standing in that.
Obviously, like Black representation in not just film, but even going back earlier, like in theater, has been like a constant problem like in this country and in the world.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as what you would like to bring to that conversation?
Mm-hmm.
And how would you like to progress Black representation like in your work or just in the culture in general?
So a common thread in, just the existence of like African people in America is like when you read books and, watch movies, like, and, just live it, like we understand, that there's like a protracted, struggle, that's happening. Like the story does not just, begin and end neatly, in like quick little sections. In the early 2000s, I don't remember exactly when, but I read this book, The Miseducation of the Negro, and like it was published early, like before the 60s. I don't remember the exact date, but when it was just talking about like all of the things, that plague Black people, and even like, Souls of Black Folk, W.E.B. Du Bois book, and the things that he was talking about. There's a specific chapter about Atlanta, that he talks about the potential of Atlanta and like, what could happen if all of these Black people centralized in this space, did some fly shit. And like, as it relates to film and, things being seen and representation, like it's still just an advanced version of like the things, that we've been talking about as it relates to film, like since the 1920s, to really like, go back and have the representation conversation. Like it starts with Oscar Micheaux. He had his own independent film studio in the 20s. Like, so like learning about that story, I learned about him and William Greaves around the same time. And I knew about Melvin Van Peebles before them. So it's like, a history, like a lineage of, independent media ownership and production, that, we're all a part of, like from a legacy standpoint. So it's not really too much to change. Like I think, it gets more nuanced just based off of like how people want to be represented. It makes me think about, every little thing, like people, who dark skinned, people who light skinned, people who fat, people who gay, people who straight, people who are something that we have not yet defined. Like everybody gonna want to be represented at some point. So it's just kind of always gonna be the conversation. I think we're just really like taking some part of the conversation forward that somebody already started. Like there was definitely people who may have been like two-spirited or trans and like, desired representation through film or theater or music or whatever at the time. And, that wasn't really the case. So maybe that aspect of representation is further behind, where we just are like, as Black people, speaking through an African-centered lens. I just think where we go now is just to continue embracing the fact that there is a lot of ways to look at representation. Like I don't think there has to be necessarily a unified Black agenda, that we're going forward with in film. It's like, all right, this is what we all doing, this is how we all being Black in film right now. Like that's not what I'm here to do. Yeah. I just want to like Melvin Van Peebles, one of his things was, why do I just have to make films about Black people or Black things? He was in Paris, making films, and like they definitely weren't just about the Black experience. Oscar Micheaux's films were only about, maybe not only, I ain't in his mind, but the reason why he made the films that he made was because there was none. Like it was literally like he was making, diss tracks to the movies that white people was making. It was like, oh, this is what y'all got to say, so I'm gonna make this one so that people can understand that it's this way on this side. So I guess maybe also just a more, I don't know, maybe just stepping out of like the lens of like, I guess, colorism as like a motivation for making things too. Like I don't feel like pressure to at this point to express uniquely Black narratives. A lot of the things that I look at right now are just more energetically based, just in terms of like how we relate to each other, because we've also been pushing like, those divisive narratives for so long, and they only do but so much. So
And that is like the definition of privilege, right? It's like
Mhm.
a black artist has to tell a black story, whereas a white artist can just pitch a story.
Yeah.
Right? And it's like,
yeah, just say shit.
Yeah.
Like, that's definitely something, that we discuss amongst each other. Like, white people just be doing shit and they just be doing it. And it's like, it ain't that we can't. Like, we could just do shit. I think it's just really about how people align, like, their motives, like their reason for wanting to make film. Like, we could tell whatever story we want. So I think there's still a lot of like ideological things, that could be pushed forward and like, I guess made okay in a certain sense. And I think when you make the thing and people see the thing, that's a part of people being like, oh, okay, it's okay to do it like that. I thought I had to do this or say this,
Something you said earlier makes me think of this aspect of film that it fascinates me and also deeply frustrates me, which is that I believe that film history is important because film is history. I mean, every time you hit record, like you are capturing history, and then you put it together, and like every film is, whether they mean to or not, a social political lens into the time from which it was made. And yet films, and this goes for features and I think television to both, can be very, very bad at telling historical stories because they require that beginning, middle, and end. And like you identified, like this is a story that's ongoing. Like it didn't end happily,
Yeah.
And the fast version of history, I think this is why the fast version of history always is around wars, because they usually have a definite beginning and a definite winner, you know? But this story, like, is ongoing. Like it does not have a Hollywood ending or a defined conclusion. And I think that's one way where films are trying to like force these stories like into that film format. It does it a great disservice. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think that's why documentary is so strong. Like it's a, declarative statement. Like I think documentary really represents how filmmaking can produce something new and innovative, like, maybe some, film revolution. Because part of like my thinking with that is just understanding like how documentary was able to like progress as an art form. And you mentioned the ethnography thing. So Jean Rouch, he was a French ethnographer. He was stationed in Africa. Like I think he settled like primarily like in Niger. What made me really look into him, like you can fact check all these things just to make sure I'm saying the exact right shit, but it's mostly right. This dude, Jean Rouch, he was a French ethnographer, and for whatever reason, I don't know what the story said, but he separated like from the French government and then just like stayed in Africa and then started making his own ethnographic films about just daily life, and like in the process of making these films, he developed a practice around teaching the people who were in the films how to make film. And like this was all happening before the French New Wave. So like the things that he was able to like figure out technique wise with a camera and like, basically the creation of cinema verite, like they come from ethnographic work. And in the French New Wave, being a part of like, this period of critique and, like philosophical shifts and how you can make a film, that's what roots me in that thought process that documentary is going to represent, like that transition of that change and like what we're doing, from a filmmaking standpoint. The things that happen to push that forward with the French New Wave and cinema verite was primarily cameras becoming more mobile. And now, like cameras are more mobile than ever. Like I got a camera on me right now, just in my right pocket, like if we're trying to get to it. So like we can do a lot. Like, and it just makes something like, or what somebody like Oscar Michaud did more poignant is just like, imagine what he could have did, just with like a camera in his pocket in the 1920s.
And it does make me think, because like every high schooler is filming their own documentary at all times. So the stage is set for some sort of a new formation of documentary storytelling.
Yeah, and I think it comes with that blend of this is not going to be like a straight narrative. It's not going to be straight documentary. but how do we still somehow plan for that? Like, how do we leave room, like for the magic and like the things that just will happen in documentary, and marry that with some type of like definite idea of how we maybe want it shit to go, or like how we feel it needs to go, and just moving with that. Like, I think the ideology of documentary and it just really fits well with like life right now, and people like being able to like recreate and like make commentary on life. I think it will kind of like flow based off of like adopting that ideology in filmmaking from documentary.
Wow, that's amazing. That's powerful.
Thanks.
That's powerful stuff.
I just came up with that.
Artemus, thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find you? Where can they follow your work? And also, what do you got coming up on the horizon?
So I got a lot of things coming up, or maybe just one thing with a lot of parts. I'm working on closing out my research from being in Atlanta for so long. Like, I've been over 10 years, like just documenting like my own kind of day-to-day existence as a, member of the creative community. And also like documentary has always been a way for me to learn about myself by learning about other people. So I've like taken that to the extreme, like by studying just like as much as I feel like is necessary about being an artist, and like coming to, I guess, a conclusion on what it means, and like also what it means to be in a place like Atlanta that has this something that's really, really close to rhetoric and truth. Is whichever way you look at it, but like a place where innovation happens. Like, Atlanta always being historically tied to that is what we've always been able to like read, and that goes back to Souls of Black Folk. Like, that's what he was talking about in the 1910s and 20s. That this is the place where you come to do some fly shit, whatever it is at this time. And my project now is focused on just putting that all into like, a just singular kind of expression. It's not gonna like be singular. Like it's gonna need to be a docuseries. Like, I have been doing a lot of writing, so like I have, a book that I'm gonna contextualize it in. Because of like all of the things that have happened since I got into filmmaking. Like, there's so many ways to create things. Like, I just think about like how to like be in the mix with all of it, but how to also, put it into like, just one kind of like art form. So I'm still mixing and matching, everything, and just seeing like what comes out. But I'm doing it in service of like this study to just really have something personally declarative to say about Atlanta. And like, the South, and hospitality and community and togetherness, and like, a lot of that stuff is really like warm and fluffy. But I think that we need, more realistic like narratives to balance out the warm and fluffy rhetoric. Like, okay, it is very community oriented here, but like, what does that actually look like? Like, community isn't just this one thing or this one way of doing things. And even like, when you juxtapose that with the politics of the city and like, how they support artists or don't, those are the things that I'm interested in like expressing like with this study, because like I've been in it. That's a part of like, ethnography, like participant observation, being able to like say, this is how that felt, this is what was going on, this is what people are actually saying in relation to what I'm seeing them do, and like what actually comes out of like the actions of people. I just want to be able to like leave something that other people in indie filmmaking and just the arts period can build off of. Like, I guess that all goes back to, I guess, maybe why anybody would do documentary filmmaking. Like, I guess we feel like we can make a difference when we make these things. So my process has just been very multifaceted. So you can go to my website to keep up with it, artemusjenkins.com, ARTEMUS Jenkins.com. I'm going old school. I want to push everybody back to websites, or at least my website. I'm going to still do Twitter things. I'm not dancing on TikTok or nothing like that. I'm gonna do newsletters and blogs. I'm gonna just be retro. You know,
break out the bookmarks board.
Yeah, we doing manifestos. Our movie night is coming back, Cinema Souterrain, in March. So again, go to the website so you can, you know, get the exact date. I don't know when this is going up. But yeah, and it's doing more stuff with, you know, ATL Film Party. I'm going to be a judge for the documentary competition that you mentioned. So I think just more like, you know, continuing to like, you know, be available like as a resource, you know, consulting, mentorship, making things with like way more people, so that everybody can just get a good flow for like, you know, how the shit could actually be going, you know.
That's beautiful. Artemus Jenkins, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.
And until next time, that's a wrap.